Mr. Stocker, thank you for coming to our interview corner right after your keynote. Could you please summarize the main aspects of your keynote?
Well, I was trying to open up several perspectives on the influence of digitization to the way how we are dealing with memory, how memory is produced, organized and perceived, but also how memory and archival stuff, how our appreciation changes because of the digital technologies.
And in your keynote, you also mentioned that you are a fan of archives, but you also hate archives. How can we imagine that?
Well, I'm really a fan of archive because I can spend days in museums or archives, and especially when it comes to online archives, I'm one of these victims who suddenly spends the whole night just digging around and finding interesting material. But I hate it because when you are responsible to preserve material, which I am, of course, also as director of Ars Electronica, it suddenly becomes really a nightmare because there are so many things are very expensive but still very complicated, like the issue of rights management, copyright, the longevity of digital material at all. So it is really a burden at the same time.
The Ars Electronica, of which you are the art director, arranges every year the Ars Electronica Festival, which faces questions about the future with respect to art, technology and society. How often do archives play a role at the festival?
Well, in a certain way, the archive plays a permanent role because we are in an interesting situation. We are an art organization, we also have a museum, but we don't have collections. So we are not collecting images, sculptures or whatsoever, or scientific, technological material like here. We are, so to say, collecting by preserving the documentations. And since, especially for the digital-born material, the question of preservation and longevity is a very important one. We have actually, there were several years where we had annually an archive conference connected to our festival, for example, but it's also always a topic because we are collaborating in some European Union projects, and then we have meetings of the partners at the festival.
Okay. What were the biggest challenges you faced in the past with Ars Electronica with respect to archives?
Well, the biggest challenge is actually how to make it public available. I think that, of course, there are the usual challenges. We have very old material. We have quarter-inch videotapes from the 70s and the 80s. We have all the crazy and strange data formats that especially the Japanese had in the late 90s, sometimes formats that we never had here in Europe, and suddenly you have it in your archive. But these are things that you can tackle and you can deal with it. But it seems totally hopeless to envision that we finally get a meaningful European-wide way how to work with copyrights in a meaningful way that helps not only a few industries, but that is really kind of helping us to make archives into a living, permanent element of our time, which would be so obvious based on the technical possibilities we have.
And what challenges do you think are soon to be in the near future, also with respect to archives?
The main challenge, I think, for all of us is how to preserve it. I mean, we all have limited resources to digitize the stuff, and the moment you have digitized it, you have to start to think about how to convert it into the next generation. And I think the challenge is really to keep this kind of long-time commitment, which is when you are a professional archive, it's not a question because this is what you are here for. But nowadays there is more and more people or organizations who are not per se responsible for archiving, are in the role of archiving. And I think this whole thing that we, at the end, I think every citizen, everybody will become an archivist of our time.
My next question is very controversial and has also often been discussed at this conference. Do you think that the analog carrier has become obsolete now?
Well, there are new ways to, so to say, rediscover and reinvent the analog carrier. I think after a certain hype where we thought everything is now going digital and throw away the old stuff, we recognize now that bringing back the information, the digital data, into the physical space is one of the most interesting things, because we are physics, we are physical constitutions. So I think it's important for us to better deal, we can better deal with information that is also physical, and it has a lot of interesting concepts in the way how to store and preserve data. Whether it's the idea to convert digital information in DNA, and then suddenly you have a physical analog material that is preserving the data much better and much longer. Or these ideas to use the old medium film, but instead of having photos and documents, you just put the ones and zeros as black and white dots on it, which also uses the qualities of analog data and combines it with the qualities of digital data.
And my final question, how do you think will the archive be in the year 2020?
Well, I hope it will be a huge cloud of archives where, as a user, you have wonderful, easy ways to connect between one archive and the other. And if I find something interesting about Vienna and the Library of Congress, I get immediately intelligent, so to say, agent that links me to similar material that might be stored here in the National Library, and the next one might come from, I don't know, France or somewhere. I think this interconnection, this is at the end, the internet and the digital media created a situation that archive is no longer for archivists, but for everybody. But this is, of course, a very big step yet that we have to make.